For episode 2 of this podcast, I'd like to cover a topic that I think really sets the tone for what episodes of the show are going to be about. Each episode, I'd like to just cover something that I find fascinating, whether it be a place that I visited or a place that I hope to visit in the future, maybe a particular food that I want to learn about, a cuisine, a culture, a particular person, maybe it's even an animal or a specific object. I just really find myself wanting to know more about the things around me in greater detail, in a broader context. Back when I was in Korea, I was working 7 days a week and I didn't have a lot of time for things like hobbies or even reading books. I was mostly just working. I did make time to study French so that I would be able to move to France, but now that I'm here in France, I'm not learning anything in any official capacity, and so because of that, I find myself missing learning a little bit. Living in a new place, there are things that I'm encountering for the first time, even as an adult. Sometimes when I come across a new hobby or even a new animal or a new food, for example, there are some kinds of vegetables that I didn't really eat when I was living in the United States or in South Korea, but here in France, it's part of our regular diet. So whenever I come across those things, I kind of want to learn a little bit more about them. I mean, this is so cliche, but the older I get, the more I realize that I know really nothing about the world. And sometimes I'll be looking through pictures of places that I've traveled, or I'll be cooking a new recipe, and I just feel like I really want to understand it more, and I just want to know more about it. So I thought that having a podcast might be a good place to explore those things and also share it with others. I hope you enjoy it. And another thing is that I want the podcast to be entertaining, hopefully informative in some capacity, but mostly I just want it to be fun. One of the things that I've really been having fun with since I moved here to the countryside is the chickens that live in our backyard. Before I met Jeremy in person, we had been messaging for a week or two back and forth, and one of the things that he told me about is that he had some chickens at home. The township that I grew up in was about 70,000 people, so it wasn't a massive city, but it wasn't by any means rural. And then, of course, living in Busan, a city of 4 million, and Seoul, a city of 10 million, I wouldn't say that it was very common to find people with chickens at home. So when Jeremy told me that he had a flock of chickens living in his backyard, I thought that that was really cool, and I was really looking forward to meeting them. It turns out that in this village, it's just a village of about 300 people. Pretty much everyone has chickens in their backyard. If you take a little stroll through our neighborhood in the morning, you'll hear tons of roosters all over the place. It definitely makes for some interesting wake-up music, but I like it a lot. So when Jeremy first told me about his chickens, I was imagining very stereotypical clip art style brown hens, and I was pleasantly surprised the first time I saw the flock because they're all different breeds, they're all different sizes and different colors, and so it was really cute to see this sort of mix of chickens that he had going on. One thing that I found funny was that he didn't have individual names for the chickens. He would just refer to them collectively as the girls in French. And that also included the one rooster in the flock. So the rooster and the 5 hens together, he called them the girls. You might recall from the last episode that Jeremy and I first met in October, so it was getting to the end of fall. Out here in the northern part of France in autumn, it's pretty rainy, it's already pretty chilly. There isn't a whole lot to do if you're out in the countryside. Just, spend some quality time sitting on the sofa in front of the fire. And at the time that I had met Jeremy, the chickens didn't have an enclosure. They have their own roost where they go to at night, this little wooden structure at the back of the yard. But as far as being enclosed, they didn't have any sort of enclosure, so they had free reign of the backyard, and you'd be sitting on the sofa and suddenly there would be a flock of chickens sitting on the porch looking in through the window at you, which was hilarious and also a little bit unsettling because they would just intensely stare at you. Sometimes they would make their way to the front of the house, and so you'd be standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes, and then you'd have a parade of hens going across the windowsill, making their way to eat the worms in the front yard. They are in a fenced-in area now for their protection. So anyway, back when I had first met them, it was a cold and rainy day. We were just hanging out at home, and there they were. The chickens had made their way back to the deck. I was just sitting staring at them. They were staring back at me, and I decided to give them all names. So the oldest in the flock, naturally because she was the oldest, I called her Grandma Chicken. And rest in peace, Grandma Chicken. She has since passed away. But The first one was Grandma Chicken, and then the largest chicken, I named her Hobo because Jeremy told me that occasionally she would disappear for a few days, maybe take a trip to the next door farm and then come back, so she was Hobo. After that, there's this beautiful jet black chicken, and in the sunlight, her feathers shine kind of iridescent emerald. She's just really pretty. Her name is Bagheera, and Jeremy actually chose that name. The next hen, just for some reason, something about her, she seemed particularly sassy, and with her cute and very fashionable black and white salt and pepper feathers, I thought that I would call her Miss Juicy. She was the one who would always be digging around in the flower boxes. She just kind of seemed to do whatever she wanted, and this name really turned out to be an apt name for her because after living here for a while, the next summer, I would occasionally leave the sliding glass door open, and she would just welcome herself into the house. One day, I walked into my office, and she was literally clucking around in my office, so I think that that name really ended up suiting her. That was Miss Juicy. And then that brings me to my favorite chicken, the most magical chicken in the whole world, and her name is Tube. And I'm not going to explain why her name is Tube. I'll let you take a look at the picture. As with all of the episodes, you can find some photos to go along with it on the Instagram and Facebook pages. So if you head over to those pages, you can take a look at the photos of the chickens, and I'll let you take a guess as to why you think her name is Tube. The first person to guess correctly, you get a prize. Maybe I'll do an episode about something that you're fascinated by as your prize. So give it a guess, try to figure out why her name is Tube. And she's definitely the most special chicken in the flock. If you see her, she has gorgeous silver feathers, and the eggs that she lays are blue, sky blue. No, they are not blue on the inside. A surprising number of people ask me that, but they're just regular eggs on the inside, but the shell of the egg is blue. And at night, rather than sleeping in the roost with the rest of the chickens, she actually flies up onto the top. So she climbs a tree. We have a tree in front of the roost. At the base of the tree, it kind of splits off into a V shape, and she climbs up inside this V shape, and she flies from the tree over to the top of the roost. The really weird thing about this is that she can't get it on the first try. It usually takes her 4 or 5 times to be able to actually get into this roost. So she's Tube. She's our most special chicken. And I love her. She's got magic powers. And then finally, we're left with Steven, and Steven is our rooster. I call him Demon Steven because he's very violent. He's really aggressive. To be fair, Jeremy did get him from a kind of rescue situation. He was living in a really bad situation before Jeremy brought him home, so maybe he's got some trauma. Either way, he is really mean, and you can't really go near him. The funny thing about him is that he's much smaller than all of the hens, so he's really this tough guy strutting around. He does have beautiful feathers and he's very elegant, but at the same time, he's the worst. He's really mean and scary. It's really funny that Steven is so arrogant. He doesn't always do his job. One of his main jobs is to keep the rats from entering the roost, but he never really does that. But one thing that he does definitely do is defend his hens. He's very protective of them. If you look at the picture of Steven, he's kind of a mixed rooster. We don't think that he's one specific breed, but more of a mix, but he does look like the Gallic rooster. And you may know that the Gallic rooster is the symbol of France. And if you've ever wondered why the Gallic rooster is the symbol of France, it's because back in the time of the Romans, when the area of what we now call France was still Gaul, the Romans were kind of laughing at the Gauls a little bit because in Latin, the word Gallus, it means Gaul, but it also means rooster. So they were laughing at them a little bit. But the Gauls, they identified with the rooster for its courage and determination, defending the flock. A French friend once asked me if I knew why the rooster was the symbol of France, and of course I didn't. And he told me that people say the rooster is the symbol of France because it's the only bird that keeps singing even with its feet deep in shit. I looked this up. I wanted to know where this expression came from. A late comedian made that joke. And I always thought that was a funny explanation of why the rooster would be a symbol of France. And although the Constitution doesn't officially recognize the rooster as the symbol of the French Republic, you will see the rooster even on the uniforms of sports teams. You'll see many weather vanes with roosters on them. And between the 16th century and the French Revolution, which happened in the late 1700s, the Gallic rooster was even on some coins. Napoleon didn't really want to have the rooster as the symbol of France. He preferred an imperial eagle. And so Napoleon and then the Second Republic, they went back and forth. And then Napoleon III, he also decided that he didn't want to have the rooster as the symbol. But finally, the Third Republic, they reestablished the rooster as an official symbol. It ended up being on stamps and on coins. There's even a gold rooster on the gate of Élysée Palace. If you look up a picture of this rooster, it looks exactly like what you would see just before Stephen attacks you. So it's pretty accurate, I would say. We have a thing called a Steven stick. It's this broken hockey stick that we have to carry with us when we're going into the chicken enclosure. And it's not to use as a weapon against Steven. It's just for self-defense because he will launch at you and you need something to kind of shoo him away. I can't tell you how many times I felt like I was in a horror movie because I'd go into the chicken roost to collect the eggs and turn around and there was Steven just standing in the doorway of the roost ready to claw me. And to answer Napoleon Dynamite's question, yes, the chickens do have large talons, and especially Steven, he's just the worst. So we have to be careful of Steven. Those were the original members of our flock. Our flock has grown twice since then, and both times it's been quite an adventure. The first time, so it was about a year after I had started living here, we decided that we would try to let some of the eggs hatch. So we put 3 of them under a heat lamp, and happily one of them did hatch. Unfortunately, the other 2 didn't, but one hatched, and she happened to hatch on my late grandfather's birthday, so we named her Ragged Moon as his namesake because my grandfather's name was Raymond, and so Ragged Moon's just kind of another form of that name. So Ragged Moon was born, but we didn't really want her growing up by herself, so to give her some company, we bought 3 brand new chicks who had hatched on the same day as her from a woman not too far from here who had been selling chicks of a different breed. The 3 chicks that we bought, they are super cute. They're a breed that is a smaller breed of chicken. They're extremely fluffy. They're just like these little marshmallows walking around. We bought 2 black and white ones, and then for €2 extra, we bought one of the special ones who is completely black with curly feathers. And we only wanted hens because, generally when you're raising chickens, 1 rooster is enough for the flock as long as you don't have too many hens. And depending on the size of your enclosure for your chickens, usually 1 rooster is enough. So we bought these 3 chicks. So as I said, the first 2, they're the normal type of that breed. They have the regular feathers. They're just black and white. And then that 3rd one, she was called the frizzy version. Her feathers don't grow exactly curly. They grow in almost a backwards direction. So she's really fluffy. Her feathers go from her head all the way down to her feet. So she's absolutely covered in feathers. But when you pick her up, you can feel that she's actually pretty skinny, so she's really cute. She's just this walking fluff ball. We named her Corn Dog, and the other 2, they ended up being Ron Swanson and Blurp. Blurp is just the way that Jeremy used to say the word burp. He thought that that was the English word for burp, and I loved the way he said it, so we named her Blurp. That's how we expanded our flock last year. And then a few months ago, Jeremy's sister asked us if we would be willing to adopt her 2 hens because she felt that she could no longer take care of them. They were the same type as Hobo. I didn't really mention, but Hobo is a giant chicken, and she lays massive eggs. She's the biggest one in our flock. She's got those feet that really remind you that chickens and dinosaurs are related. And so we ended up adding these 2 bigger hens to our flock. One is white and one is gray. So we decided to call them Gandalf the Gray and Gandalf the White. Now with the Gandalf twins, we're up to 11. So kind of getting up there. And so after we took these 2 chickens, we decided, that would be enough for our enclosure, for having 1 rooster. We don't need that many eggs every day. We're just 2 living in our house. So our flock is now at full capacity. We also had a little bit of a problem. As I mentioned, Steven is pretty small. He's a small rooster, and Miss Juicy was the mother of Ragged Moon, and Miss Juicy wasn't a small hen, but she wasn't huge either, so Ragged Moon is actually a pretty small chicken. She's just a little bit bigger than Steven, but she flies really well. Ever since she was born, she's had this ability to fly out of the enclosure, and so we'll get a call from our neighbor that Ragged Moon is over in their land again, and one of us will have to go over there and pick her up. Also, Steven sometimes goes with her, and I never really mind when that happens because it's a good opportunity to put our Pekingese dog's skills to the test. As I said, our Pekingese, her name is Prelin. She loves to give the chickens a hard time. She chases them around. She tries to catch them. I'll have to talk about her in another episode, but when we adopted her from the animal shelter, she was the most sweet and timid thing, and she still is so sweet and so timid. We'll go for walks. We'll see all different kinds of animals, and she has no reaction. But for some reason, this dog, she is obsessed with chickens, and she's a Pekingese, so she's fearless. There have been 2 occasions where some chickens have gotten out of the enclosure and went into our backyard, and Prelin, she just goes straight for the chickens, and we go running and screaming after her because she tries to kill them. She has a pretty bad overbite, so fortunately the most damage she seems to be able to do is pull out a few feathers. Anyway, anytime Steven gets out of the enclosure and heads over to the farm next door, we put the harness on Praline and we take her over there and use her to kind of corral him back home. Kind of like a sheepdog does with sheep, but it's a dog and her rooster. Because you can't pick up Steven. If you try to pick up Steven, he will knife you with his talons, and so you can't get near him, but Praline, she has no fear, so she helps us to drive Steven back into his area. We noticed that Rag and Moon, after adopting Jeremy's sister's chickens, Rag and Moon was really starting to spend a lot of time outside of the enclosure, and we were thinking, oh, maybe the other chickens are bullying her because she's the smallest. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that Steven is her father, and so maybe she's going to go look for a different rooster. We weren't really sure, but she had reached about 1 year in age at that time, and so we thought, maybe she's on some kind of teenage chicken journey. And we weren't really worried about it because she would normally come home at night and we would see her from time to time, so we weren't very concerned about her. But this had been going on for what seemed about 3 weeks. I was sitting in my office and I heard a baby bird sound outside, and I thought, oh, that's really weird. A baby bird must have fallen out of the nest or something. So I went outside after work to check it out, and it was actually Rag and Moon. She was sitting in the middle of our backyard, but she was just sitting in the grass, and it was really weird the way she was sitting. I was a little worried that she was hurt, so I started to walk up to her, but as I approached her, she stood up and she revealed that she had brought home 9 baby chicks. I was totally stunned because, first of all, how this tiny chicken was managing to hide 9 chicks under her body was pretty impressive, but also we go into the chicken roost to collect the eggs every day, and we didn't see her in there. She hadn't been laying eggs, so where had she been hiding these 9 eggs, and where had she managed to hatch them and bring them back home? We were pretty confused. So when Jeremy got home from work that day, he went to go investigate, and it turns out that Rag and Moon had been flying up on top of the roost. She had made a nest, and it was really hidden in the leaves. She had laid 11 eggs up there, and 9 of them had hatched. We did bring the 2 other eggs in that day and tried to put them under the heat lamp for a few days to see if maybe they were just late hatchers, but unfortunately they never did. This is really fascinating because chickens, they hatch after 3 weeks. So generally a chicken will lay 1 egg per day at most. I don't think it's really common that a chicken would be laying 2, and certainly not 3 or 4. So how she managed to lay all of these eggs in a row and successfully hatch them is just a wonder of nature. And I know that this is like a normal chicken thing. This is what they do, but just thinking about that, just thinking about the fact that some of those chickens were waiting up to almost a week before hatching so that they could hatch with the eggs that had been laid about a week later really amazed me. It's also weird because what it meant was that every day she went on top of the roost, she was sitting on top of her eggs, she would come down from her hiding place every day, spend some quality time with Steven, who I will remind you is her father. So it turns out that Steven is both a father and grandfather to these chicks. Then she would go back up on top of the roost and lay another egg, and she did this for at least 11 days in a row and managed to successfully hatch 9 of them. It's just really, really fascinating. And another mystery is how in the world she managed to get these little chicks down from up high on the roost safely, because when I found her, she was on the ground with all of her chicks and none of them were hurt, none of them were sick, they were all fine. And we started to get a pretty good idea because, as I told you, Rag and Moon is great at flying, and it turns out that all 9 of her chicks are excellent at flying as well. During the first few weeks of taking care of them, we decided that we wouldn't let the chicks outside in their early weeks. We do live in the countryside, rats around, field cats. We have some owls that live in the tree in the backyard, so there was plenty of opportunity for these little chicks to be snatched up and eaten. Also, just maybe attacked by the other hens. Generally, chicks leave their mothers between 6 and 8 weeks, but for those first 6 weeks, definitely they need to be with their mom. We still had the cage that we had used to raise the chicks last year. It's a pretty big cage, and so we put Rag and Moon and her 9 chicks in this cage, and for the first 2 weeks, we kept the chicks in the cage with Rag and Moon all the time, and then after a few weeks, we decided to start letting them out during the day, and every time I would open the door, I would open the cage door, and then I would open the door of the patio to let them go go outside and they would all just fly outside. So now we've got these 10 flying chickens, and that put the number of our flock from 11 up to 20. So we had quite a lot. Sadly, just a few days after the chicks hatched, we discovered Miss Juicy had died. We're not exactly clear what caused her to die, but it's probably that she was very old, because we don't actually know the age of any of Jeremy's chickens. They've all been given to him as gifts or rescues. The original flock, none of them were raised from eggs, so she probably just died of old age. So sadly, Miss Juicy, just after becoming a grandmother, passed away. But still, that leaves us at 19. Our friend is going to take 3 of them, but besides that, we will be keeping the other 6, including what has turned out to be 2 roosters. So in this flock of 9 chicks, there were 2 roosters. So far, they haven't been fighting with Steven. Steven himself is a pretty old rooster, so maybe there won't be too much battle. And now that we have so many hens in the flock, it might be okay. In the spring, we are going to expand the chicken enclosure. I would love to have more tiny tubes, but besides that, I don't think we really need any more chickens. So hopefully nobody sneaks off next season for laying another surprise batch of chicks. I'm not really sure what we're going to do with about 15 eggs every day. So if you're in the area and you need some eggs, stop by. I'll give you a box. One of the things with keeping our chickens is that if we're going to keep these chickens and if we're going to take their eggs, we want them to be well cared for and we want them to have a happy and healthy life. Both Jeremy and I consider ourselves to be quite concerned about the environment and things like that, but we also find that as long as the chickens are very happy in the yard and they have enough space, they have enough food, they're comfortable, we don't find much issue with keeping them in our yard and using their eggs. For food, we give them an organic chicken feed, and on days that we're not going to stay at home or when the dogs won't be outside, we open the fence and we let them roam around in the backyard freely, just to give them a chance to go explore other parts of the garden and get at the bugs and get at the grass that are in the other areas. The other thing that we feed them is any food that we don't eat ourselves. For example, if I'm cutting up some vegetables or even our coffee grounds, the eggshells, when we have a vegetable that can't really be eaten, or if we have some bread that starts to get stale, all of those things go into what we call the chicken bucket, and then the chicken bucket goes to the chickens. The chickens love to dig through that, and anything that they don't get to, we have like a compost pile. It really works out well as far as not having much food waste. Just as a little side note, after living in Korea for 10 years, I've really become accustomed to eating spicy food on a regular basis. And living in France, especially in the north, where we have a lot of potatoes, a lot of cheese, a lot of dairy, we just don't really have that spicy food, and I find myself really missing it. I really crave the food from Korea, and so I often cook Korean food here myself. If you are familiar with Korean cuisine, you know that a staple of Korean cooking is kimchi. Kimchi is fermented cabbage that has been seasoned with different things, including red pepper flakes. And one time I made kimchi by myself. Unfortunately, one of my jars of kimchi must not have been sealed properly because it grew some mold on the top. So after scraping off the mold, I thought, well, I'm going to put this in the chicken bucket. But that got me wondering, can chickens eat spicy food? Because I usually make my kimchi pretty spicy. And so I looked it up, and it turns out that chickens can eat spicy food because they don't actually have very many taste buds. They only have around 240 as opposed to the around 10,000 that us humans have. And in case you were wondering, chickens do have tongues, but they just don't have that many taste buds, and they don't have the taste buds that would be receptive to capsaicin. Capsaicin is the thing that makes food spicy, and so because they don't have the receptor for that, so you can give chickens spicy things and it's not really going to harm them. And in fact, when I was looking this up, I found that some people feed their chickens spicy things purposefully to keep them a little bit healthier. I just wanted to add that little fun fact and let you know that chickens are really good at eating spicy food. So like I said, it's great because it kind of goes in a circle. We give our extra food to the chickens, and then in turn they give us some eggs. So it really works out. We like having the chickens a lot. Of course, there are a lot of benefits of having the hens here and being able to take fresh eggs from them whenever we need. I don't need to go to the store. I don't have to buy some eggs, and I don't really know where they're coming from or what conditions the chickens have been living in. We know that there aren't any antibiotics or things like that going into the egg. One thing I haven't mentioned is that when a chicken in our flock seems to be feeling a bit under the weather, Jeremy will just make up a little concoction of boiled garlic and sage. He gives that to them in their water, and then they snap right back to health. So we know that the chickens are healthy and that the things that they're eating are not harmful to them or to us. So that part is nice. And also, I know this sounds a little bit strange, but I feel like the conditions which the chickens live here, the fact that they're happy and that they have space and that they eat healthy food, it really shows in the flavor of the eggs themselves. I never would have thought that the flavor of eggs would change that much, but after growing up and living in Korea, I always ate eggs that I bought from the store, and these are the first really fresh eggs that I've ever tried, and the taste really is different. It's quite nice, especially the little white eggs that we get from the fluffball chickens. They're perfect, hard-boiled. You put them in a salad and they just really taste very nice. During the winter, the chickens aren't really laying eggs every day. During the winter, they're conserving their energy, and a lot of them, they molt their feathers, so a lot of their energy is going towards those things. But especially during the summer, the chickens, they lay eggs almost every day, so we could have upwards of 10 or 11 eggs in one day. I use them in a lot of different recipes like mousse au chocolat or meringue, savory dishes such as a quiche, things like that. Even if I want to make homemade ice cream, you need egg yolks. So I do use them in a lot of different things. And one of my favorite ways to use them is in fresh pasta. If you ever want to give making fresh pasta a try, I can't recommend it enough. All you really need is flour and eggs. So for every 142 grams of flour that I use, which is about 5 ounces of flour, I use 1 whole egg and 2 egg yolks. I get that together into a cohesive dough, and I knead it for about 7 minutes. And then after the end of kneading, it will be smooth and silky. And then you let it rest for 30 minutes, and after that, it's ready to go through the pasta cutter. The recipe itself varies a little bit depending on the humidity of your kitchen, but generally I find that this recipe works out really well and it makes some really nice pasta. So if you have flour and eggs, I definitely recommend you give it a try. Another thing that we really like about having our own eggs is we know that they haven't been chemically sanitized. When we get our eggs from our chickens, generally they're very clean, so we don't need to wash them. In the case that we do need to wash them if they're extremely dirty and there might be some risk of them having bacteria on them, we wash them and then we generally use those ones first. We use them right away because the thing with washing eggs is that once you get an eggshell wet, you remove this protective covering called a bloom. The bloom is like a cuticle, and without the bloom, the egg becomes more porous and bacteria is able to penetrate that shell. If you are listening in the US, you know that you find your eggs in the dairy section in the refrigerator, but in many parts of the world, such as here in Europe and in Asia, in the Middle East, eggs are sold at room temperature, and that's because they don't go through that egg washing process. If you are listening from a different part of the world, and if you ever visit the US and you're looking for eggs, you will find them in the refrigerated section. That's because they've undergone this egg washing process, and once an egg gets wet, once that cuticle has been removed, they need to be refrigerated in order to prevent any bacteria from growing and penetrating the shell. On the flip side, if you are someone who's from the US and traveling in a different part of the world, and you see that the eggs are kept at room temperature, they're totally safe to eat. It's just that egg washing process is prohibited in that part of the world and they don't go through the process. And it's the same here. We don't wash our eggs, like I said, unless it's absolutely necessary because one of them is particularly dirty. Generally, when we get them from the hens, they are very clean and we keep them at room temperature. So that is about all I have for the stories that I wanted to share with you about the chickens in our backyard. They've really been a pleasure to be living with, and I hope that you found the stories interesting. I haven't given names to the new chicks yet, but after our friend chooses the 3 that he would like to take home, we'll be giving them names, and I'm pretty sure that they're all going to be named after Wes Anderson movie cast members like Bill Murray and Tilda Swinton, so that'll probably end up being the names of those chickens just because they're such a little crew. They hang out, they go all over the place. I'm also going to add a little video. Yesterday, Ragged Moon and her chicks were hanging out on the deck, so you'll have a chance to see them now. And in addition to that, I will add a video of Praline corralling Steven. It's pretty funny to see. It's a really short clip, but I'll add it to the Facebook and Instagram posts, so be sure to check that out. Tune in very soon for another fascination. Thank you so much.